Hello, I'm Sarah Jack and I'm a therapist in lockdown in Dorset.
I'm Annie Power and I'm a therapist in lockdown in London.
And just to recap on our previous videos, we're really talking about the preoccupied and the avoidant attachment patterns that very much can get activated when people are under stress or feeling vulnerable, as the times at the moment. And just also to recap, the preoccupied pattern is one of pursuing, pushing, protesting, eventually amplifying their feelings to really try and get across really their panic to their partner. And the partner, if they're avoidant, and typically these are patterns that go together, the preoccupied and the avoidant might, in their stress and vulnerability, be shutting down, pulling back inside themselves and kind of removing themselves to quieten down the feelings of panic inside.
I think that recap's really useful because you've also emphasized the two alternative words that we can use for avoidant and preoccupied, and these are talking about the withdrawer and the pursuer, which are perhaps more user-friendly. Often in a couple, there's one person who pursues, who seeks more connection, and one person who tends to withdraw and seeks more autonomy. In many ways, we're comfortable in a relationship when we get those two things, the amount of autonomy and the amount of connection, kind of working well enough for both people. And attachment theory, which is our whole kind of worldview that we're sharing here, is very, very interested in how a human being manages this balance between seeking connection and having space for the self, which are both very important, valid human needs. The theme that we're going with today is how a couple, an imaginary couple, where one is more of a pursuer and one is more of a withdrawer, how they manage the anxiety around COVID-19. So we can imagine a couple where the pursuer, and we'll say, for this first couple we're thinking about today, we'll make it kind of quite easy by saying the pursuer is that is a heterosexual couple and the pursuer is the woman. So there's a he and a she, it's kind of easier to convey. And so let's say that she carries the anxiety for the couple and is pushing for lots and lots of precautions to be taken, a lot of time talking about the virus and what to do, watching a lot of news, being in touch with a lot of family members, in her anxiety, wanting a lot of extra connection with her partner. And we can easily imagine that the partner, who we're saying is a withdrawing, avoidant style, he is overwhelmed by that, and he may have great anxiety himself about the same matters, about money, about illness, about other family members being ill, about jobs, about children and homeschooling, all the same worries, but he would ideally cope with them by keeping rather quiet about it and watching something on TV or reading a book or just in some sense getting away. So these two people could get quite unhappy together because the one who needs connection in order to feel comforted and the one who needs space and peace and quiet in order to be comforted, they're obviously entering into quite a conflict which can escalate.
Couples usually have their things that wind them up at the best of times anyway, the little things in life, or little things in the household. But at these times, these things can really get exacerbated. And on top, when the patterns get exacerbated inside them, then we can really look at something quite explosive at times, particularly as the preoccupied person, her in this case, can really start to get more and more panicked, more and more angry, more and more protesty, and then start to blame and to criticize, or even just to pick, sending the avoidant, he character in this case, really into more and more of a shutdown to the point where he might not stop speaking altogether.
And that's like a really vivid description of the behaviors, and we can think of them as attachment behaviors in each partner, the one behavior of getting louder and the other behavior of trying to escape. And could you say something about the underlying feelings that might be driving those behaviors in each person?
I think the panic in both of them, they're both trying to really hold themselves together. I mean, for the preoccupied individual in this relationship, what she's feeling is likely feeling very alone, really feeling a sense of, what's going to happen to me? What's going to become of us? Will we be okay? Will our loved ones will be okay? And very much seeking out attachment and seeking out family members and seeking out everybody through Zoom or party house, is it, or through emails, etc., in order to try and gain that contact, to try and keep the alone feelings, the rejected feelings, the abandoned feelings at bay, and at the same time feeling very rejected by her avoidant partner, who's shutting down, exacerbating the feelings that have already been triggered off by what's going on in the world around at the moment.
I think that connection between them, or the lack of connection, is the bit that's so central to the pain on both sides, because, as you say, the preoccupied person feels rejected. The behavior which is kind of normal for the avoidant person is not to say much, give a few one-word answers, try and keep things calm. But that actually has the effect of making the preoccupied person more frightened, and then more voluble and more asking for more and needing more connection. And of course, the more that person, and we said it in this case, we went with he and she, the more she seeks connection and reassurance, the more he feels he can't manage himself because he's being smothered, and becomes maybe quite actively rejecting in a way that creates a very painful feeling of abandonment for the preoccupied person. The avoidant person, in terms of their underlying feelings, it's often quite similar, that there are very deep fears and longing to feel a sense of belonging in a quiet sort of way, not wanting something too active that it's experienced as intrusive. And with the avoidant partner, just as with the avoidant infant who we talked about in the second video, it can be quite easy to think that the person is not distressed, because the distress is being very visibly manifested in the preoccupied partner. But the withdrawing partner, often on their own side, feels quite lonely, but they don't have a natural vocabulary for reaching out. And they experience the way their partner reaches for them as kind of blaming or critical. So they shrink from that. And in some ways, just as the preoccupied person, in seeking connection, is trying to hold on to the relationship and make it work, they mean well for the relationship. The withdrawing person is trying to keep things calm for the sake of the relationship. They also mean well. They're kind of doing the best they can to keep the show on the road, but unfortunately they're both triggering an escalation in the other. When we think of an avoidant and a preoccupied partner fighting, and the preoccupied person expressing a lot of distress, it's easy to forget that the avoidant partner may have very much an equal measure of distress. And ironically, that's what their preoccupied partner would love to see. They would feel reassured if the avoidant person were able to share some of that concern. And that's the saddest thing about this pattern, that both partners are provoking the thing they don't want, because the preoccupied person wants to see more of the vulnerability and the anxiety that the withdrawer is carrying. And the withdrawer would love it if the preoccupied person could find some of the stillness, which they will have somewhere inside them. But by being so quiet and monosyllabic and rejecting of the concerns and minimizing of their partner's concerns, the avoidant person provokes the very thing they don't want, as indeed does the preoccupied person. But the avoidant person on their own side often feels very lonely inside, lonely and rather helpless about what to do in the relationship. Often the reason they'll give for not speaking up more is they're worried about saying the wrong thing. They feel at a loss they kind of don't know how simple it is, the thing their preoccupied partner wants of them, which is just to say a few words about themselves. Do you think we've covered it for today, Sarah?
There was one further point that I wanted to bring up that I don't think we've covered in the videoing, but you mentioned it beautifully before we started videoing, which is that the avoidant can really feel a sense of not feeling they belong. And in a way, through shutting themselves out, they exacerbate that feeling. But I think these feelings can really be triggered off, and as you mentioned earlier.
But I think you've really described how these patterns are such, they're absolutely balanced out. They match so much because the avoidant produces just the experience of not belonging that is so bleak for them, so very bleak. But the preoccupied person, they fear being too much. And with their escalation, they make themselves too much. But both of them make the feared thing come true.
Well said.
Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye. We're going to talk about how fear will operate differently in someone with more avoidant strategies from how fear looks in someone with a more preoccupied pattern.